Hi, good afternoon. Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about all of the things that happen after you get divorced or you separate from your children's other co-parent. And I am a partner here at Tully Rinckey, and my practice mostly specializes in matrimonial and family law. And I've been doing this kind of work for a pretty long time. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happens after you sign all of your documents and you go home with all of your paperwork and you have it all in your hands. And unfortunately, sometimes people don't understand what those documents mean or what they have agreed to. And unfortunately, you should know what you have agreed to or what your documents mean, but sometimes people don't. And what the problem is that even if you do know what they mean, it's hard for a lay person to understand what each document is for, what they use it for. And even when you do understand, the problem comes up when one parent follows the document and abides by it, but the other parent decides that they're not going to follow that document, or they don't have to follow it, or it doesn't apply to them. And this is a very, very big problem for people who co-parent. And luckily, there are some people that are able to co-parent beautifully and they have no problem at all. And I don't believe they're here. But for the people that are having trouble co-parenting, I think those are the people that are here, and we're going to try to help you today. So once the divorce is entered and you have your agreement and you go home and you think, terrific, my divorce is entered, unfortunately, you have to deal with that co-parent for a long time. And one of the things that comes up is, what type of custody do you have? And it's really important to understand the type of custody that you share with your co-parent. And this is not a webinar to discuss types of custody or to, figure out how you want how you want to have custody, but it's important for you to understand the type of custody that you have so that you can co-parent well. So for today, we're going to assume that the parents we're talking about share joint custody of their children, and the kids are going back and forth equally between two parents. And that means that they are sharing decisions, and the children maybe go back and forth every other weekend, a few times during the week, that the parents have to be able to speak to each other to make decisions. And even though you have decided you don't want to live with this person anymore, you still have to be able to make decisions with this person and speak to them. And one of the issues that can be very, very complicated is that you have to speak nicely to this person. And even though you don't like them, the problem arises that in the future, a lot of the text messages, the emails, all of the things you are going to say to this person about your children may in fact be used in a future case against you or for you. And you want to make sure that everything that you say is kind, is only relevant to your children, only relevant to your parenting decisions, and not about the other person. And this is one of the most difficult things I find, even for me personally, to do. You don't like this person and you don't want to have anything to do with them, but you still share children. And you have to co-parent, and it's really difficult. And you went from being spouses to now you're co-parents, and there's all sorts of new things that are involved. There could be new spouses involved, there could be other children involved, and it's important that you set clear boundaries when you're speaking to your co-parent. And the other thing that is really important, that you document everything. And the reason for this is that there are many parents that do not comply with the parenting agreement. And when people don't comply with the parenting agreement or comply with the parenting schedule, these can be violations. And when the violations come up, this is when you need to file either a modification of custody or a violation. And what happens is there are all of these strange days that come up with the parenting schedule. There's sick days, there are holidays, there are days that don't necessarily take into account your parenting schedule. So you may say to your co-parent, listen, the kids have a half a day. Somebody has to pick the kids up from school early. This wasn't something that we thought about in advance, or our agreement doesn't take into account that we both work. Somebody has to be there to pick the kids up early. And you think to yourself, well, why does it always have to be me? Why do I always have to be the one to pick the kids up? And your co-parent thinks, well, of course you're going to take care of it. You're always the one who takes care of it. And they assume that you're going to be the one to take care of it. And they send a text to you that says, you'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. And your initial reaction is to text back something that's not always the nicest thing. And the one recommendation I always say is never text back in anger. Take a minute, think about what you want to say, maybe write it to a friend, write it to yourself, but never text it to your former spouse. This is very dangerous. Texting in anger can be one of the worst things that you can possibly do. It can cause your ex-spouse to take you to court and force you to use a parenting app. The court can't make you be civil to your former spouse, but they can force you to pay for parenting apps, and they can force you to make all your communication go through a parenting app. And that's not something you necessarily want to do. So I always say, pretend that everything you write is being published on the internet or being published in the New York Times, and assume that everything you read and write and say is going to be read by a judge, because chances are somebody is going to try to use it in court. And when somebody doesn't comply with your agreement, for example, you do have the right to file an agreement, a modification. So what do I mean with one parent failing to comply with the agreement? So let's say one parent fails to pick the children up all the time. And failing to pick up the children is in fact a violation. So you can say, well, they never pick the children up. I always have to be home. How is that a violation? Well, the judge will say, I don't really believe that it's all the time. Give me an example. So the most important thing for co-parents to do is to literally keep a documented record of what their parenting schedule should look like. So if your parenting schedule says that, the other parent is supposed to pick them up on Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, put in a calendar the days that the other parent is supposed to pick the children up, and actually write down. Don't think that you're going to remember, because you will not remember, but put down in the calendar, picked up, the time, if they actually showed up on time, and what happened, because you will not remember what happened. And that is the best way to keep track of it. The next thing to do is that it's really important to remember if they actually keep their phone calls with the children, to see if they are keeping in contact. Are they remembering the children's birthdays and schoolwork, and keeping in touch with the children when they are not with them? So this is an area where tension can really arise when the children are, let's say, with you. You think, okay, well, I don't want the other parent to call because the children are with me and that's my time. But a judge would say, you're not fostering a relationship with the other child, with the other parent, excuse me, with the other parent. And that's not fair to your children. So all of these things can really play into your parenting rights and into your parenting schedule. So it's very important that you keep a written log of everything that goes on during your parenting time. And I know that it sounds almost arduous to keep this type of log, but think about a parent who brings you back to court for a violation and says, they call every night during my parenting time and they interrupt my parenting time. Or the parent that says, they never visit or they never call, and I don't think that they should have custody anymore because they don't have any contact with the children. You want to be able to show, yes, I do visit, and I do keep my visitation, and I do, keep my phone time. So not only is it important for you to keep a record of your own visitation, but it's important to keep a record of the other parent's visitation, only to prevent a violation in the future. And I'm not saying that every parent files violations, but they are very common, as are modifications. And just to prevent any future issues, it's very important to prevent. A little bit of prevention goes a long way. So if you think that you have a co-parent that is litigious, it is a little bit important to keep a record, is the easiest way. And, the types of violations or modifications that I see, things that would come up would be a parent denying visitation. So somebody might go to court and say, my co-parent doesn't let me see the child. And this one is very, very common, where one parent does not allow the other parent to see the child. And you think to yourself, well, why would one parent do that? Why would one parent cut another parent out? But they do. And it's very detrimental to the child. And New York State law actually says that one parent who prevents another parent from seeing a child is not fit to be a custodial parent. So you always want to be very, very cognizant of not cutting out the other co-parent from your child's life. It's very important, if you are the custodial parent, to foster the child's relationship or your children's relationship with the co-parent. It is so important. And there's a very famous story. I don't know if I believe it is true, about the mother who prevented the children's father from seeing them. And she went into the court, and the judge said that they had to go with the father over the weekend. And she said no. And she did not give the judge a good reason. And the judge actually put her in jail over the weekend for failing to allow the father to see the children, because the judge said her failure to foster a relationship with the children and the father was so egregious that she was not fit to be a custodial parent any longer. And that's a terrible example, but it is a true example. The next type of violation I see, other than denying visitation, is the parent who fails to return the child. So hypothetically, your child's supposed to be returned at 6:00 p.m. It's now 7:30. You have not heard from the other parent. You don't know where your child is. You're terrified, and you don't know what's happening. And so the parent says, you know, I've just decided, they text you and they say, you know what, I'm just going to keep little Billy for the next week. And you say, wait, that's not what our agreement says. We have week on, week off. This is not your week. It's time to return him to me. And the other parent says, yeah, you know, I don't really want to. I'm going to keep him this week. I just think it's, you know, I'm going to keep him this week. And you're just flabbergasted because you don't know what to do. So this would be a time where you go to court and you file an emergency violation saying that the other parent refuses to return the child. Now, there could be 101 reasons why they refuse to return the child, but that would be a reason to file a violation. And that would a very extreme example. Another example of a violation would be interfering with communication. And this is one that seems pretty innocuous, but can be so detrimental to children, is the interference of their phone calls. So a lot of parents now make an effort to FaceTime with children once a week, or once a day, or every other day. And what happens is that the custodial parent will say, you know what, now's not a good time. They're eating dinner or they're outside playing. And the parent calling loses that connection with the children. And it's really a very difficult time for the non-custodial parent, because they look forward to that phone call every day or every other day. And it really should be the custodial parent's obligation to set aside that time, just as you would set aside that time for a piano lesson or to take the child to soccer, that you set aside that time specifically to talk to the other parent, because that is the child's very, very important time. And they shouldn't be outside playing. If you know that the non-custodial parent is going to call at 7:30, then you bring the child in the house. Now, if that time is set aside every day at 7:30 and the non-custodial parent doesn't call, or they wind up calling at 8:00 or 9:00, then you have a reason to maybe ask the court for a modification for that. So these are all problems that can arise with an agreement. The next big one is a really big one, is when one parent decides to take the child and move out of state, either telling you or not telling you. But this is a very big deal when one parent decides that they want to move the child out of state. Now, the moving parent has to get permission from the parent who stays in New York, and they have to get permission from the courts. If you have a New York State custody agreement, you can't just pick up and move out of New York with your children. You have to get permission from the state of New York, from the court, to move. If you want to move without your children, you're more than welcome to, but you want to take your kids with you, you have to get permission, especially if your custody order says that you cannot move out of the state of New York. And another big violation that we see is a constant change in the schedule. And this is where those weird sick days, holidays, vacation days, all those weird days come into play, where one parent just does not follow the schedule. And a lot of agreements don't take into account these days. Many do, but some don't. So it's very important that you communicate with the other parent how you want to handle these days. And the other big problem that I run into a lot is issues with transportation. Who's going to pick up the child and drop them off, and where are they going to be picked up and dropped off, and how is that exchange going to be completed? And the issues that parents have around the pickup and drop off of children, sometimes it goes smoothly and beautifully, and sometimes the kids can drive themselves, which is fantastic. But when they're young and parents have to do the picking up and dropping off, and they don't live near each other, or they have moved away from each other, things can get a little complicated. So just be aware of those issues. And a big violation that I come up against is the parent who fails to visit completely. And I think the big question here is, I don't want to say who cares, but what does the court do, right? You bring these violations, and what does the court do? So when there's a violation, the court has entered an order, and you have either your agreement has been it's part of your divorce decree, which is then a judgment of divorce, which is a court order, or you have a custody order. And orders are court orders. And if you violate a court order, it is contempt of court. And most people don't think it's a big deal. At least they claim it's not a big deal, but violating a court order is contempt of court. And there was just a case that was recently decided in New York City where one of the co-parents violated that court order so many times, the judge put the other parent in jail. I think it was, I don't even know how many days, it was a lot of days, and fined them $250 for each incident that they violated the parenting order. And some of these violations seem small when you look at them. Oh, they didn't pick them up at this time, they didn't pick them up at that time. But when you accumulate them, it really becomes overwhelming. And when you're the parent that is always taking on the picking up and dropping off and taking the brunt of the extra, it becomes overwhelming. And so it's really important that you have open and good communication with the other parent. And I can't say it enough that to be careful about how that communication is handled. I can't say it enough. And to document everything. If you do want to change your schedule, document it. If you want to ask how the change should be, documented. Because if somebody claims you didn't tell them that you wanted to change, and they say, oh, well, they just didn't pick the child up, you need to show that you did in fact reach out to the other parent and say, I would like a change. I'm trying to make a change here. And they either contacted me or they didn't contact me. So everything that you do with the other parent really needs to be documented only for your own protection. And that is really the most important thing. And so that's, as much as I think I should say about the parenting schedule and violations, as far as modifications go, it is extreme. I don't want to say it's extremely difficult to get a modification. Modifications are possible. Judges do change them, but I believe that's for another time. It is quite difficult to get a modification once you have an agreement, and that's for another time. And I'm going to move over to child support now. And whether you're the payee or the payor, the most important thing, if you don't hear anything else I say today, never pay cash. Say it again. Never pay your child support in cash. People say that they will give you credit for the payment of cash. And there are many people who are good and kind and wonderful people who will acknowledge that payments in cash are accepted, and those are wonderful people. However, most are not. And the problem with child support is that if you don't pay it, you can go to jail. And a judge has ordered the payment of child support, and failure to pay your child support is a violation, and you can be held in contempt. And it does take a long time to get there, but you can be forced to go to jail for failure to pay your child support. And this is the one instance where going to jail doesn't clear your slate. So even after you've served your time in jail, you still owe your child support. And the one thing that people ask all the time is, can arrears of child support go away? And the answer is no. And I'll say that again, arrears don't go away. So that is why, if it was important to pay attention to your visitation and how your communication is with your custody, it is vital to pay attention to your child support order and how it is supposed to be paid, when it is supposed to be paid, and how much is supposed to be paid. So again, never pay in cash. You cannot track it, you cannot prove it, and you cannot have anybody state that it was paid. Always pay in a manner that you can show. Pay by Venmo, Zelle, cash. I mean, not cash, I'm so sorry, by check, anything. I know a lot of people want to pay by money order, and that is almost as difficult to track as cash. So what happens is there's an order from the court, and one person is paying and the other person is receiving. And there becomes a discrepancy, and that discrepancy forces one person to file a violation. And when there's a violation, the person who is the payor has to takes the burden and has to show that they actually did make the payments. So if you have electronic records, it's very easy to print out your electronic records and show, I made this payment, I made a payment, I made a payment, and bring that to the court. And having those records easily available and pulled right off the internet is very, very handy. However, if you pay cash, you cannot do that. You have to rely on the other person to say that you made those payments. So that's not a good thing. The other issue with child support becomes the out of pocket. And this is always where it becomes very, very difficult to track the out of pocket expenses. And some people think that it's not a big deal, or they actually don't know what their out of pocket expenses are. And I did set up this chart here. Is how I would track the out of pocket expenses. So your agreement or your divorce decree, there are certain expenses that are statutory. Those are mandated. Those are medical. And each agreement would state how much is your responsibility versus your co-parent's responsibility. There's a percentage that you have to pay and a percentage that the other parent has to pay. So the ones that are statutory are medical, dental, professional. Those bills are, when I say professional, they would be medical and dental and things like that. The ones that are also mandatory are any expenses that are for childcare relating to work or bettering yourself with education. So it's very important that you notify the other parent of the expenses. And it's also very important that you know what expenses you are responsible for and what expenses you are not responsible for. This is one of the most important parts of your agreement. A lot of people think that they just get a bill and they have to pay everything on that bill. So, for example, on this tracking sheet, the one person sent a bill and they included all sorts of things on the sheet. And I'm sorry, I was just, and the other parent has decided not to pay certain items. But I want to explain how this sheet works. The first thing you need to do is read your agreement to see what you actually need to pay for. Okay, so do you need to pay for extracurricular? So that is something that you would have either agreed to or not agreed to in your agreement. And I can't tell you whether you've agreed to it or not, because that's something that would be in your personal agreement or not. And your agreement is something that's personal to everybody, and some people have it in their agreement and some people don't. So you have to read your own agreement. And the other thing that's very important is what doctors you have to pay for. Some people use out of network doctors, some people don't. It's very important to see which doctor bills you have to pay for and which you don't. This is a very, very important in your agreement. The other very important clause in your agreement could be that once a parent decides that they want to have an expense, for example, go to camp, they need to ask the other parent or speak to the other parent before having the expense be paid. So that's a very important issue. You don't want somebody to spend your money before they speak to you about it. So that's another important clause to talk about. So there are many apps out there that people can use to keep track of out-of-pocket expenses, but this is just an example of keeping track of expenses. So there's however many children you have and the expense, the amount that you paid, and each parent's pro rata expense, the amount that you paid for the bill, and then the date that then you have to send the bill to the other parent. Now, the other parent is entitled to see the date that you paid the bill, a copy of the bill, and absolute proof that you paid it, because I certainly wouldn't pay a bill that I didn't see proof of payment for. And you should never pay a bill or refund somebody that has not shown you proof that they paid the bill. And I would never pay a bill that said Amazon. You don't know what they bought. You don't know what the charge is for. You know, I would want to believe that my co-parent bought books and school supplies, but I'm very suspicious, and I would assume that they bought something that was not for the children, and maybe they bought dog food. I don't know what it is, but I would certainly want to see the bill. So before you pay for anything, I would make sure that you see the actual bill and that the doctor visit was in fact for the children and not for themselves. And if your co-parent says, I can't believe that you don't believe me, you just say, it's what my lawyer told me to do. It's me. I, of course, believe you. This, you know, my lawyer told me to do it. It's just, you know, so that they have proof. Always blame it on the lawyer, and it's the easiest thing to do. And when you're sending these documents to the other co-parent for payment, it is extremely important that you send your co-parent proof of the payment and proof that you sent them the bills for payment. Because if you ever want to go back to court and ask for payment, the judge is going to say, did they know that you paid the bills? Did you send the payment? Did you send them a request for payment? And if you say, sure, they have to know that you actually sent the payment. And that's got to be in an email or a letter somehow. And it can't just be a document showing the amounts. It has to actually be the bills. You have to send the bills to the co-parent. And some agreements actually say that they have to be sent every 30 days. You know, you don't want to wait till 6 months till they, you know, accumulate. It's important that the other parent has a chance to catch up so that it doesn't become overwhelming for the other parent. But it is really important that the expenses, this is, to me, this is a very arduous task, is keeping track of these out-of-pocket expenses. It just, they add up, especially when kids do a lot of activities and all sorts of things. So I think that that concludes my part of the webinar. I know that there was a question about out-of-pocket expenses, and I hope that I answered that question. I'm just going to make sure that, just going to take a look and see. I hope I did answer.
And if there are any additional questions, please submit them via the chat so I can send them over to Nancy.
So the question was, what do you do when your ex doesn't pay his share of add-ons? And it is a very difficult question. I mean, a very difficult issue when they don't pay their share, and you have to first give them notice that they owe the add-ons. And you have to make sure that what you are asking for is part of your agreement. You have to give them notice. And then when they don't pay, you have to take them back to court as part of a violation. And you have to file a petition in family court for a violation of the agreement.
There doesn't seem to be any questions.
Okay.
Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, and thank you, Nancy, for presenting. Today's webinar was recorded and a copy will be sent to all attendees early next week. I hope everyone has a good rest of their night and a good weekend. Thank you.
Taylor.